Hi, I'm Lina. Welcome to Lina's Storybook, where we share the most unforgettable audio novels. Let's get started.
I spent my entire life setting myself on fire to keep my husband's brother's widow warm, only to realize on my final moments that her son was my husband's own flesh and blood. This time, I am burning their house down instead. The clinking of glasses and a chorus of congratulations echoed around the dining room, pulling me back to reality. I blinked, my vision coming into focus. I was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. My son, Jimmy, was sitting on a small wooden stool nearby, his big eyes fixed eagerly on a massive platter of roasted beef in the center of the table. The roast was perfectly caramelized, marbled with fat, and smelled absolutely divine. The result of over 2 hours of my hard work. Scenes from my past life flashed rapidly through my mind. My husband, Mark, was a hard-working farmer in our rural, 1970s American town, and our household consisted of 4 main adults. Aside from my parents-in-law, there was Mark and his older brother, John. But John had a tragic fate. Less than a year after marrying his wife, Rachel, he lost his life in a devastating coal mine accident. At the time, Rachel had just discovered she was pregnant, and the entire family fawned over the unborn child, treating Rachel like absolute royalty. I, too, had treated her like a fragile treasure. Her status was elevated simply by the child she carried, and she lived a life of pampered luxury. When Rachel gave birth to a boy, Tommy, the whole family doted on him, as if he were the center of the universe. My own son, Jimmy, was only a year older than Tommy, yet the family constantly demanded that he yield to his younger cousin. They always told Jimmy that as the older boy, he had to give up everything for the younger one. The best food, the best toys, everything had to go to Tommy first. Even the small treats I bought for Jimmy with the meager wages I earned doing odd jobs were snatched away by Mark and given to Rachel and her son. Whenever I complained, Mark would look at me with profound sorrow and say, "My brother John passed early, leaving Rachel as a struggling single mother. We are a family, and we must help her. Besides, you know how good John was to you when he was alive." In my past life, I was foolish enough to believe him. I thought that since we were all women, it was my duty to support a struggling widow. On the day Mark was elected as the town supervisor, he used his entire bonus to buy premium cuts of beef, ordering me to spend hours cooking a celebratory feast. But when the food was served, he piled all the meat onto Rachel and Tommy's plates, leaving Jimmy and me with nothing but boiled greens. As the years went by, his devotion to Rachel only escalated. He forced me to do all of Rachel's chores. When the family could only afford to send one boy to a good school, Mark chose Tommy without hesitation, buying him a new backpack and driving him every single morning. Whenever I voiced my exhaustion, he just repeated his old excuse about the poor widow. I worked myself to the bone in the city just to save up for Jimmy's college tuition. But when Jimmy finally earned his spot at a university, Mark manipulated the situation, stealing Jimmy's admission documents and having Tommy take his place, lying to Jimmy that it was my idea. Heartbroken, my son left town to work on the railroads, severing ties with me. Meanwhile, a lifetime of overexertion left me bedridden, with a severe lung infection, my hair entirely white despite my young age. As my strength faded, Mark brought Rachel to my bedside. She was slightly older than me but looked radiant and youthful, having been sheltered her whole life, while I was a withered shell. Looking down at me with disdain, she sneered, "Thank you for sacrificing everything for this family. Since you're at the end of your road, I'll tell you the truth. Tommy is actually Mark's son." John was ugly and crude. He could never compare to Mark, she laughed. "It is a good thing he passed away early, and you were so stupid. How else could we have lived so comfortably? Just wait here for the end. We've saved enough of your money to buy a beautiful house in the city." I stared at Mark in sheer despair, the agony in my lungs making it nearly impossible to speak. "Is this true? Why would you do this to me?" I choked out. "Because you were foolish," Mark replied coldly. "You should be honored to have served me. I even gave you a child. Don't be ungrateful." He walked away with his arm around Rachel, leaving me paralyzed and emaciated. When I begged him to call Jimmy back, He lied and said my son hated me. I passed away days later, my body deteriorating in agony. As a drifting spirit, I finally saw Jimmy rush back, weeping over my motionless body, and realized every misunderstanding between us had been orchestrated by Mark. After my funeral, they kicked Jimmy out and moved into the city using my life savings. Thankfully, the heavens heard my agonizing cries and granted me a second chance. Mark, Rachel, and the boy who stole my son's future. I wouldn't let a single one of them get away this time. I had been reborn on the exact day Mark celebrated his election as town supervisor. To mark his political milestone, he had spent all his extra cash on an expensive roast, and even prepared 2 of our farm's prized chickens. Sitting around the large oak table were the town council members, my parents-in-law, Rachel, and Tommy. At the head of the table sat Mark, beaming with absolute triumph. It was the peak of his miserable life. Flushed from the drinks, he was currently using his fork to slide thick slices of roast beef onto Tommy's plate. He gave nearly the entire platter to the mother and son, smiling warmly as he said, "Eat plenty of meat, Tommy, so you can grow tall and strong like me." In my past life, I thought his excessive affection was just pity for a fatherless child. Now I knew the truth. He was the boy's biological father. People often say that a man's love for his child reflects how much he loves the child's mother. Jimmy and I were nothing but sacrificial pawns in this house. Mere stepping stones for Mark and Rachel's hidden romance. As the lady of the house, I should have been seated right next to Mark. But as I brought the final dish out, I saw Rachel already sitting comfortably by his side. They were exchanging food and stealing affectionate glances, looking for all the world like the true married couple. Everyone was seated and ready to dig in, while I was still standing by the kitchen door in my stained apron, having just finished cooking. My little Jimmy sat on a stool, staring pitifully at the mountain of beef on Rachel and Tommy's plates. "Hold on a minute," I shouted loudly, causing everyone at the table to snap their heads in my direction. I grabbed Jimmy's hand, walked over to the table and smiled sharply. On such a joyous occasion, how can we start eating before everyone is seated? Everything must come full circle. Starting a feast incomplete is bad luck, wouldn't you say? "Look at all that roast beef, Jimmy. Are you hungry? Do you want some meat?" I asked, looking down at my son who was practically drooling. A prime roast like this was something we rarely saw, not even on Christmas. I pulled up a heavy wooden chair and forcefully squeezed it right between Mark and Rachel. Sitting Jimmy down, I kept my smile plastered on Rachel. "Tommy, you have so much meat on your plates. Can you even finish it all?" My brother passed early. Rachel has it hard raising a child alone. We must take good care of them, Mark announced with a look of righteous duty. I nodded in exaggerated agreement. "You make a great point, Mark. We definitely need to take care of her. I must say, the folks in this town are very forgiving. Where I come from, a woman whose husband passes away right after they get married is considered cursed. They'd gossip about her until she was run out of town." "Oh dear sister-in-law. I have a sharp tongue, please don't mind me," I continued smoothly. "Mark is right that we should support you. But how can we support you if we are starving?" As I spoke, I reached over, grabbed Rachel and Tommy's plates, and scraped all the prime beef into a clean bowl, placing it directly in front of Jimmy. "This meat is for my son and me. Once we are full, we'll have the strength to take care of you," I declared. Mark's face instantly went ice cold. "What on earth are you doing?" he hissed angrily. "We have guests. Watch your manners." I asked Rachel to help me in the kitchen earlier, but Tommy conveniently started crying, demanding his mother hold him. What a coincidence. He really knows how to keep his mother from doing any hard work. So, while she was busy cuddling her son, I slaved away over a hot stove for over 2 hours. I'm exhausted. Am I not allowed a single bite of the meat I cooked? I fired back with absolute justification. Mark's face darkened further, and the visiting town council members exchanged awkward, uncomfortable glances. My mother-in-law, Martha, scowled and stood up, trying to grab my arm to drag me into the kitchen. I violently shook off her hand. "Martha, I am not a child. Whatever you have to say can be said right here. Stop trying to pull me away, you foolish girl." I just wanted to ask if there were any side dishes left in the kitchen, Martha stammered, looking deeply embarrassed in front of the guests. In the past, this was her usual tactic. Whenever she was displeased with me, she would drag me out of sight of company and furiously lecture me. Women back then were conditioned to be foolishly obedient, catering to their husbands and in-laws under the guise of family values. A good daughter-in-law was expected to keep her head down, but this wicked old woman knew the truth about Tommy's parentage all along, actively conspiring with her son to make a lifelong fool out of me. Come on, let's drink. Women's squabbles are just noise. Let's focus on the drink. My father-in-law, Arthur, interjected quickly, trying to salvage the atmosphere. The town council members, eager to avoid our domestic drama, offered forced smiles and raised their glasses. Seeing that she couldn't drag me away, Martha shot me a venomous glare. Suddenly, she reached over, snatched Jimmy's bowl of beef and unceremoniously dumped all the meat back on Tommy's plate. Eat, eat, eat. An older brother must yield to the younger one. If your younger cousin doesn't have enough, why should you eat? Martha snapped at Jimmy. Tommy was almost 5 years old and incredibly cunning. I had caught him secretly bullying Jimmy countless times before. Children are experts at reading a room. He knew his grandparents favored him. With his meat returned, he flashed Jimmy a triumphant, nasty grimace. You don't get to eat any. Foolish boy, Tommy taunted. Jimmy's lower lip quivered, his eyes welling with tears, but he bit his lip hard, too terrified to let out a sob. I noticed the corners of Rachel's mouth twitch upward in a victorious smirk before she immediately masked it with a look of gentle concern. Martha, please, Jimmy is just a child too. Here, let the two brothers share, she cooed, picking up her fork as if to pass a meager scrap back. Don't spoil him. Mark barked instantly. He's the older cousin, yet he's always bullying Tommy. What kind of behavior is that? He has absolutely no manners. Just like his mother taught him. Hearing those words, a surge of absolute fury shot straight up my spine, practically blowing the roof off my skull. In my previous life, I had been too naive. I endured the mistreatment myself, which caused my son to grow up fearful and overly cautious. We lived in our own home but felt like unwanted refugees. I pulled Jimmy into my arms and glared fiercely at Mark. You say he has no manners. Is his father gone? Is raising him solely my responsibility? What is wrong with a child wanting to eat meat? If his father were gone, you could blame me for poor parenting. But his father is sitting right here breathing. How dare you say that? Every time there is food or new clothes, they go straight to Tommy. If people didn't know better, they'd think Tommy was your biological son. I roared the moment the words left my mouth. The air in the dining room froze solid. Mark's pupils dilated in sheer panic, reacting exactly as if I had driven a knife into his darkest secret. What on earth are you talking about, you crazy woman? He screamed. He raised his hand and brought it down hard, striking me across the face. The force of the blow sent me stumbling backward. I tightened my grip on Jimmy, terrified of dropping him. As I steadied myself, the stinging heat on my cheek was drowned out by Jimmy's terrified wails. Mark's face was flushed dark red with rage, the veins in his neck bulging as he pointed a trembling finger at me. You dare cause a scene on my big day? Are you trying to make my late brother roll in his grave? Bullying his widow and orphan? Aren't you afraid John's memory will haunt you tonight? Why should I be afraid? Consequences only haunt the guilty. You're reacting awfully strongly. Did I strike a nerve? I challenged, gently placing Jimmy down on his stool. Be a good boy, don't cry. Mommy is right here, I whispered, stroking his hair. Tears streamed down Jimmy's face as he tugged at my sleeve. I don't want meat anymore, Mommy. Please stop fighting. I won't eat it. He sobbed, my heart shattered, and tears spilled over my eyelashes. I stood up straight and locked eyes with Mark, letting my gaze sweep over every person in the room. When Mark had struck me, Martha had muttered, "Good riddance," from the sidelines. The town council members kept their heads down, pretending to be deaf and blind. In this rural community, domestic violence was treated as a private, everyday matter. I looked at the lavish feast I had spent hours preparing. I took 3 quick strides forward, and grabbed the heavy edge of the oak dining table. Fine. If my son can't eat, then nobody eats. With every ounce of strength in my body, I heaved upward, flipping the heavy table completely over. Plates shattered, bowls crashed, and the expensive roast beef tumbled into the dirt and broken glass, creating an apocalyptic mess on the floor. Everyone froze in stunned silence, their mouths hanging open. I turned my head, glared dead into Mark's eyes, and gritted out through my teeth, "I want a divorce." "She's lost her mind. Have you swallowed gunpowder today? What a curse on our family to have married such a crazy, ungrateful woman," Martha shrieked, slapping her thighs as she wailed from the floor. The town council members, who had been splattered with hot gravy and broth, wiped at their clothes, their faces losing the relaxed, indifferent expressions they wore just moments prior. The mayor shot me a deeply displeased look, then turned to Mark. "Your domestic disputes aren't our business. We'll be leaving now." Without another word, he led the other officials out the door. Soon, only Mark's family and I remained in the messy dining room. Arthur, my father-in-law, sat in the corner puffing on his tobacco pipe, glaring at me through the smoke. "Disrespecting your own man in front of outsiders like that. It is only because Mark is so kind-hearted. Any other man would have confronted you severely by now. So strike me." "Why don't you strike me? Mistreating your wives is a proud family tradition here, isn't it?" I fired back, my voice dripping with venom. "It's a good thing Martha here is so resilient. Any other woman would have run away long ago. But Martha is such a saint. Even when she was mistreated in her youth, working the fields while pregnant, she never left. What a perfect obedient woman." When I first married into the family, Martha used to boast to me about how she endured Arthur's mistreatment when she was young, framing it as a badge of honor. I used to pity her. Now, I realized her suffering had simply turned her into a bitter person who wanted to inflict the same pain on me. Martha plopped her rear onto the floor and began to bawl louder. "It is only because times have changed. In the old days no daughter-in-law would ever dare speak to her in-laws or her husband this way. That is right. The mistreated daughter-in-law finally became the mother-in-law." I shouted over her dramatic sobs. "Your husband used to mistreat you, but now that you're older, you want to mistreat someone else to make up for it." Rachel stood to the side, clutching Tommy to her chest, her eyes rimmed with red. "I'm so sorry, this is all my fault," she whimpered, playing the innocent victim to perfection. "I've caused you all so much trouble. If you don't like me, I'll just leave. You shouldn't fight because of me. John is gone. Tommy and I shouldn't even be here." In my past life, she always pulled this trick. Whenever Mark and I argued about her, she would play the tragic widow, claiming she was a burden. Her tears were the ultimate weapon, blinding me to her manipulation and making me feel awful for complaining. I used to think, we are both women, I should be more forgiving. Now, I could see exactly what she was doing. Every word she spoke was designed to stoke the fire and highlight how unreasonable I was acting. I turned my fury onto her. "Then carry out your threats. You talk all the time. So why don't you just pack up and leave? You play the victim pretending you know you're a burden. Then take your son and leave town. Go ahead. You claim you're a hindrance, but whenever there is real work to be done on the farm, your back suddenly aches, or your head hurts. Who are you putting on a show for? Stop making empty threats. It's a good thing your husband passed away early. Otherwise, he would have spent his whole life serving a parasite like you. You're the jinx who brought him tragedy, and now you're trying to ruin my marriage and tear this house apart. You are nothing but a curse." Rachel was stunned into silence by my outburst. Snapping out of it, she burst into theatrical wails and bolted toward the door, dragging Tommy along. "I'll leave right now. My son and I shouldn't be here to bother people," she cried. "Oh John, you passed away so early, you just left us behind." "Rachel, don't be impulsive," Mark shouted, rushing to grab her arm. "She is not the head of this household. Why are you listening to her? John and I never split our assets. A part of this farm will always belong to you and Tommy. Don't listen to her," Mark coaxed, his tone unbelievably gentle and protective. Martha and Arthur rushed over to comfort her as well. Rachel sobbed into Mark's chest. "Just let us go. I don't want to stay here and be treated like trash. I'll take Tommy back to my family, and I'll change his last name. Just leave us alone." "Absolutely not. Tommy has our family's blood. He is not leaving," Arthur bellowed, his voice booming. He aggressively pointed his smoking pipe at me. "Mark, if you don't discipline her right now, you are no son of mine. It seems we've been too good to you, letting you run wild. I'll make sure you learn some respect." Mark snarled, rolling up his flannel sleeves as he marched aggressively toward me. Jimmy instantly jumped in front of me, spreading his little arms. "Don't touch my mommy." Seeing Mark's menacing advance, I spun around, sprinted into the kitchen, and grabbed the heavy kitchen tool I used for cooking, because I had prepared the chickens today. I had just sharpened it that morning. The blade gleamed dangerously in the dim light. I gripped the heavy tool, stepped back into the dining room, and aimed it right at Mark. My eyes wide with a crazed, desperate look. "Come on, try it. If you dare lay a single finger on me today, I will defend myself with everything I have. None of us will back down." Mark recoiled, visibly terrified by the sheer desperation in my eyes. He froze in his tracks. Martha let out a screech. "Rebellion, she is trying to harm us." "Shut your mouth, you old hen, or I'll strike you first," I barked, suitably horrified. Martha snapped her mouth shut, cowering behind her husband. With one hand tightly gripping the tool, I used the other to take Jimmy's trembling hand. "Listen to me clearly, Mark. I want a divorce. A divorced woman has a hard road ahead. Fine, we'll divorce, but I am absolutely not taking the kid. Let's see where a single mother and her boy can even go," Mark said coldly, regaining some of his bravado. I let out a harsh laugh. "A hard road? I think I'll do just fine. Isn't Rachel a widow who brought tragedy? And look at her, she still has a protector like you." "That is enough," Mark roared. I gestured slightly. "What, did I hit a nerve? Doesn't anyone else find it incredibly strange just how well my husband treats his late brother's wife? And you, Rachel, you sit there and comfortably absorb my husband's affections. It must make you feel grand." "I didn't, Rachel choked out, tears instantly spilling down her cheeks. She looked delicate and fragile in her clean white dress, weeping softly. Mark looked at her with pure heartbreak. I had never worn a white dress in my life. It would have been ruined by the endless farm chores I was forced to do. He turned his gaze to me, shaking his head in profound disappointment. "I was elected town supervisor today. To have a husband in local government is an absolute honor for a woman like you. Do you really have to ruin everything?" he said. "What will you get out of a divorce? The town's gossip will surround you. If you get on your knees right now and apologize to Rachel and my parents, I'll pretend you never said those words. If you want this family's forgiveness, apologize and admit your wrongs." "Why on earth would I want your forgiveness? Who do you think you people are?" Mark's face contorted into an ugly scowl. He stared at me with confusion, as if trying to understand why his usually quiet wife had suddenly grown so fierce. He couldn't possibly know that this sudden burst of courage was purchased with the agonizing past I suffered. Courage is humanity's strength. I had to fight fiercely for my own interests, so my son and I could survive. In my previous life I had thought about leaving, but a single comment from Martha about what the town would think made me cower. I had been terrified of being mocked, terrified of Jimmy growing up without support, and terrified of poverty. Now, I wasn't afraid of anything. I cared far more about my son's future than the malicious gossip of neighbors. I looked Mark dead in the eye, my voice unwavering. "Divorce, fine. Getting promoted and getting rid of a burden, what a lucky day for me. Remember this, I am the one walking away. Once we divorce, don't you ever dream of coming back. And take your little boy with you, when you get out," Mark yelled, pointing aggressively at the front door. "I'm taking my belongings," I said coldly. "Don't you dare." Martha scrambled to her feet and blocked the bedroom doorway. I turned my heavy gaze to Mark, holding the kitchen tool firmly. "If you don't let me take my belongings, I will break everything in this house to splinters. If I can't have my things, no one will use them." Mark exhaled a heavy breath and closed his eyes. He aggressively ruffled his hair before glaring at his mother. Just let her take her stuff and get out. I'm the town supervisor now. I can buy whatever I want. Martha wanted to argue, but a sharp glare from Arthur silenced her. She stepped aside, looking away. Take it and get out. Nobody wants your things anyway. I led Jimmy into our cramped room and began packing. When we married 5 years ago, my possessions consisted of a Singer sewing machine, a vanity mirror, 2 metal thermoses, and 2 heavy winter quilts. Though worn from years of use, I was taking every single item. After boxing it all up, I walked down the dirt road and borrowed an old mule cart from a neighboring farmer. I loaded my boxes onto the back, secured them with rope, and lifted Jimmy onto the wooden bench beside me. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock at the town hall for the paperwork, I told Mark without looking back. Fine. Let's see how long you survive out there without me, Mark sneered. I moved the reins and the mule began the slow trek toward my parents' farm. Jimmy sat quietly beside me, not throwing a tantrum, just staring ahead. After 3 hours on rocky backroads, we finally arrived. My parents were strict traditionalists who heavily favored their sons. Coming back as a divorced woman meant I would be met with coldness, but I needed a temporary stepping stone. I pulled the cart into the driveway. My parents, my younger brother, and his wife were sitting on the porch, eating supper. Seeing me haul a cart full of my belongings, they froze. My mother quickly set her plate down and hurried over, looking anxious. What are you doing back here with all your things? Mom, Dad, I'm divorcing Mark. I'm keeping Jimmy, I stated simply. My sister-in-law instantly looked at my brother. Taking her cue, he spoke up. Sis, a divorce affects a family's standing. What will the neighbors think of us? I am the one getting divorced. Not you. Why do you care? Does marrying out mean I'm no longer part of this family? I snapped back. In my past life, I wouldn't have dared raise my voice at them. But I had changed. I was their flesh and blood, and I had a right to be here. As long as I stood my ground, they wouldn't cross me. My father set his fork down sharply. What happened to make that boy divorce you? I am divorcing him, not the other way around. Mom, Dad, I will pay you rent every month until I save up enough to move out. Is that fair? I asked. Then you'll have to stay in the barn, my mother said sternly. Having a divorced daughter stay in the main house brings bad luck to the family. I stared at her for a long moment. Before finally nodding, Jimmy politely greeted his grandparents, his uncle and his aunt. But no one acknowledged him. Annoyed, my sister-in-law picked up her infant and went inside. Jimmy's stomach growled loudly. He stared longingly at the food left on the porch table. My father and brother ignored him and continued eating, sighing. My mother scraped some leftovers into a large bowl and handed it to me. Eat, Jimmy. Say thank you to your grandmother, I instructed. Jimmy thanked her and began eating the food as if he hadn't eaten in days. My mother sighed again and went back to her seat, offering no comfort. Fighting back tears, I unloaded my things and dragged them into the barn. Fortunately, one corner had relatively clean floorboards. I spread some clean hay, laid down one of my quilts, and made a makeshift bed. After supper, my family went to sleep without asking what had happened to me. Jimmy curled up on our makeshift bed and fell asleep quickly, though his little shoulders occasionally hitched. I sat in the dark barn, staring at the empty yard and the warm light spilling from the main house windows, and finally let my tears fall. I felt like a tiny boat in a storm, but this time, I refused to sink. The next morning, long before sunrise, my mother was already awake preparing breakfast. I grabbed her arm and pleaded, Mom, I have to return the mule cart and go to the town hall to finalize the divorce. Can you please watch Jimmy for a few hours? Once I get back, I'll start taking in sewing jobs, and I'll pay you for rent and groceries. We won't stay here for free. It is not that I don't want to help you. My mother deflected smoothly. But your brother's baby is only a few months old, and your sister-in-law is exhausted. Your dad and brother are going to town for work today, and I have to tend the crops and cook. I just don't have the time. Before I could argue, she picked up her tools and hurried off toward the fields. Shortly after, my father and brother emerged, walking past me without a word as they headed down the road toward town. A wave of helplessness washed over me. Going back meant not only signing the papers but publicly exposing Mark's true character. How could I let a person like him stay in local government? I needed the whole town to know he was being unfaithful with his brother's widow, and because of that, I absolutely could not bring Jimmy into that environment. Just as worry set in, a voice spoke from the porch. "Go. I'll watch Jimmy for you," my sister-in-law said, holding her baby. I was surprised. She was offering a helping hand. She walked down the steps and looked at me plainly. "Don't read too much into it. When I married into this family, you stayed up 3 nights, straight using your sewing machine to make me a beautiful wedding dress and a custom handkerchief. Consider my debt paid." "Thank you," I said hurriedly. I didn't even have time to check on sleeping Jimmy before climbing onto the mule cart and riding off. On the ride back, I recalled that wedding dress. We didn't interact much, likely because the grinding poverty made everyone tense. But she remembered my kindness, and with this favor, we were even. I was an excellent seamstress. The only reason I stopped making clothes was because I was forced to act as an unpaid worker for Mark's entire extended family. In fact, my entire dowry had been purchased with my own hard-earned money. My parents hadn't given me a dime. They even kept the sheep Mark's family had sent. The past was dead. In my previous life, I had no identity of my own. As a child, I worked for my brother. As an adult, I slaved away for my in-laws, my husband, and even my husband's companion. In this life, I was going to live brightly for myself. The cart rattled into town just as the clock struck 7. I returned the mule to my neighbor and walked directly to the town hall. Mark arrived shortly after. "You really don't regret this?" he asked, staring at me. I nodded. "Let's just finalize it." Word had spread fast and a crowd of townsfolk had gathered, pointing fingers and whispering about me. I ignored them entirely. These people only wanted a show and something to gossip about. None of them actually cared about my well-being. The town clerk tried to mediate, urging me to reconsider, but I held firm to my decision. I wanted out, feeling his pride hurt by my refusal. Mark slammed our marriage certificate onto the clerk's desk. "Process the divorce." By 1970 standards, the process was straightforward. Just a matter of signing a few municipal papers and updating the records. When I finally held the stamped paper, a massive weight lifted off my chest. Mark glared at me and scoffed. "A single life won't be easy. Let me see how you manage now. Is that right?" I offered him a calm smile. Rachel had just arrived, holding Tommy's hand as she pushed through the crowd to watch. She covered her mouth in feigned surprise. "Oh my, you actually did it. You're the first divorced woman in our town's recent memory. How will you survive?" We were standing right on the front steps of the town hall, a place bustling with morning activity. Several people stopped in their tracks to watch. While Rachel's lips curled into a mocking smile, I glanced at little Tommy, then at Mark, and let out a clear laugh. "Is that right? I might be the first divorced woman in this town, but that makes you the first woman in town to be with her late husband's brother. What kind of lies are you spewing, you crazy woman?" Rachel's face drained of color. I pointed directly at Tommy, then at Mark. "Everyone, take a good look. Does this boy look anything like the late John? He is the spitting image of Mark. And let me tell you a little detail. This boy has the exact same red birthmark on his back as Mark does. After John passed away, Mark took extra special care of his dear sister-in-law. Why did I demand a divorce? Because my husband treated his sister-in-law and her son better than he ever treated his own flesh and blood. Just look at them. They look identical. And let's talk about the timeline," I continued, my voice echoing across the town square. Right after John passed away, Rachel claimed she was pregnant. John passed away in a coal mine accident in January. Rachel didn't give birth to Tommy until late December. That is an 11-month pregnancy. Tell me, folks, is that normal? Her husband was gone for nearly 2 months before she supposedly conceived. As soon as the words left my mouth, the entire crowd turned their scrutinizing gazes upon Mark and Tommy. They had always looked alike, but previously, People had just chalked it up to them being an uncle and nephew sharing family genetics. But looking at them side by side now, the resemblance was undeniable. They looked identical. Tommy didn't have a single feature that belonged to John. In the 1970s, we didn't have advanced DNA testing to prove paternity. But in a small farming town, public opinion and gossip were just as absolute. Once the seed of doubt was planted, the verdict was practically sealed in the minds of the locals. Rachel clutched Tommy tightly to her chest, shaking her head frantically. "You're speaking nonsense. You're making this up." "If I'm making it up, why are you trembling?" I raised an eyebrow. Mark stepped forward, shielding Rachel and Tommy behind his shoulders. He pointed a finger at me. "Stop causing a scene and quiet down. Look at him, folks," I addressed the crowd. "Look at how fiercely he protects his brother's widow. Does this look normal to any of you?" I've caught Tommy calling him daddy before, and Mark just brushed it off, saying the boy was confused. But the truth is, he is the boy's father. An elderly woman in the front row spoke up. "Wait a minute. That is right. The boy was born in December." I remember thinking she carried him for an awfully long time, but nobody wanted to question a grieving widow. "If that is true, she got pregnant after John had already passed away. The timeline doesn't add up at all." A man chimed in. "That boy really is a carbon copy of Mark." Another woman whispered loudly. The whispers escalated into a loud buzz of scandalous chatter. And Mark's face turned dark. I raised my voice over the noise. "Mark has been carrying on a scandalous affair with his own sister-in-law. Right under his parents' roof. Are you really going to let a man without moral decency serve as your town supervisor? Who knows how he will act in public office? No way. We cannot let someone like him run our town." A local farmer yelled out, stepping forward. With one person leading, the rest of the crowd quickly joined in, loudly voicing their opposition to Mark's new political appointment. Hearing the commotion, the town's mayor, who had just arrived at his office, pushed through the doors of the town hall. Mark panicked and immediately rushed up to him. "Mr. Mayor, it is not what it looks like. She is just saying this because she is bitter about the divorce." "Mr. Mayor, if you let him take office as town supervisor, you are condoning his actions. How can a man who betrays his own family command the respect of this town?" I countered. The mayor's expression darkened into a scowl. "Mark, your promotion to supervisor is suspended effective immediately. Keep your domestic issues out of the public office," he said coldly before turning back inside. With a single sentence, Mark's political career was halted. No municipality would hire a man with such a publicized scandal. Realizing the severity of the situation, Rachel took Tommy and fled the town square as fast as she could. Mark turned to me, his eyes burning with anger. "Fine, you win this round," he hissed. Then, unable to face the glaring eyes of the crowd, he turned and ran away as well. I stood tall and addressed the remaining onlookers. "Mark and I are officially divorced. I chose to leave because I discovered his affair with Rachel. From this day forward, I have absolutely nothing to do with that family." With my head held high, I turned around and walked away from my past forever, knowing I had just halted Mark's career and exposed his secret. I remained cautious about potential retaliation. As soon as I got back to my parents' barn, I gathered my son and my belongings. I took the savings I had hidden away over the years and boarded a bus to a neighboring town. Putting distance between us, I rented a tiny room in a cheap boarding house. To make ends meet, I fell back on my sewing. I set up my old Singer machine by the window and started taking in mending and tailoring jobs. Because my craftsmanship was exceptional, word spread quickly. Soon, I had a steady stream of customers, making enough money to keep Jimmy and myself fed and warm. One afternoon, I ran into an older woman from my old town at the market, eager to talk. She filled me in on what happened to the family I had left behind. According to the woman, after my public statement, the townspeople began scrutinizing everything. They remembered that before John's accident, he had been working at the coal mines for months, without returning home. There was no physical way he could have been the father. Based on the timeline alone, the town concluded the child had to be Mark's. Mark tried desperately to deny the accusations, but the rumors persisted. A few weeks later, he got into a heated argument outside the local tavern. A physical fight broke out, and his shirt was torn. The men saw it with their own eyes. The distinct red birthmark on his shoulder blade, exactly as I had described, and identical to the one on Tommy's back. The physical detail, combined with their identical facial features, erased remaining doubts. The entire town knew Tommy was Mark's son. Stripped of his supervisor title and facing the town's mockery, Mark began drinking heavily. One night, completely intoxicated, men at the bar taunted him. In a drunken state, Mark tried to fight them and was thrown out. In his rage, he shouted a full admission of his affair with Rachel for everyone to hear. The scandal became well known. The family was so deeply disgraced that none of them ventured far from their farmhouse. Hearing this brought a sense of closure to my heart. Actions have consequences. However, knowing Mark was unpredictable made me cautious. I wanted to move to a larger city, but I needed more savings. I decided to stay in my rented room a little longer, working extra hours to build my funds. I had no idea Mark was searching for me. Business was good, and I had a backlog of clothes to mend. Late one night, I was working under the lamp. My room was located in a quiet alleyway on the edge of town. Suddenly, I heard the metallic sound of someone forcing open the front door. I stood up from my sewing machine and moved toward the door. Crash! The wooden door burst open. Standing in the threshold was Mark. Looking disheveled, unshaven and erratic, he locked eyes with me, a wild expression on his face. "Finally found you. You ruined my life, and now I'm ending this." Before I could react, he lunged across the small room. The force of his movement pushed me backward over a small table. He pinned me down, his hands wrapping tightly around my neck. The noise woke Jimmy, who sat up in bed. Seeing the scene, my little boy began crying in fear. "I'm going to finish you first," Mark shouted. "And then I'll get rid of that son of yours." He is your son." I choked out, desperately grabbing his wrists as my vision blurred. Mark shouted wildly, "I only care about Tommy. I'm ending everything tonight." I struggled for air as darkness threatened my sight. In a final effort to defend myself, my right hand reached toward the fallen sewing table. Brushing against my pincushion, I grabbed the largest upholstery needle I had. With every ounce of strength left, I struck Mark hard in the side of his face with the heavy steel needle. Mark let out a shriek that echoed in the room. He instantly released his grip, stumbling backward onto the floorboards, holding his face in agony, gasping for air. I didn't waste a second. I scrambled to my feet, picked up Jimmy, and ran out the broken door into the alleyway. "Help! Someone call the police!" I shouted at the top of my lungs. Within minutes, neighbors opened their doors and rushed out to assist. Someone called the local sheriff. The police arrived quickly, taking Mark into custody. Right outside the building, I sat in the police station, holding Jimmy close, giving my statement. After an investigation, the authorities verified everything. The scandal involving Rachel, the true relationship with Tommy, and his violent break-in. Given the evidence and eyewitnesses, Mark was convicted of severe attempted assault. The judge sentenced him to 10 years in the state facility, 10 years behind bars. By the time he was released, his life would be completely altered. Following Mark's trial, the town felt overwhelming, so I took my savings, packed our belongings, and moved to a remote town far from the past. I resumed my trade, taking in sewing jobs to keep us housed and fed. It was hard work, keeping me at the singer machine late into the night, but the peace of mind was worth every effort. Meanwhile, Mark's family became isolated in our old town. With Mark in the state facility, Martha and Arthur were furious but helpless, rarely showing their faces in public. They were met with whispers wherever they went. I heard through traveling merchants that Martha and Arthur directed their frustration toward Rachel. Behind closed doors, they argued relentlessly, blaming her for their family's downfall, and saying she had brought ruin to their household. Unable to endure the daily conflict, Rachel left Tommy in the middle of the night and ran away without a word. However, Tommy, raised with little discipline, was difficult to manage. His rebellious nature left his aging grandparents exhausted. He broke things, shouted, and refused to listen. After a difficult period, the elderly couple reached their limit. Wanting relief, they contacted Rachel's family, trying to pressure her into returning. Rachel did return, but not to reconcile. When she stepped through the door, Martha and Arthur confronted her aggressively, causing a violent altercation that left her injured. Rachel lay there in silence. Once she recovered, she acted submissive for a time, cooking and cleaning while hiding her deep anger. Just as the elders thought she had been subdued, she acted. One evening, she laced their dinner stew with a lethal dose of substance. Watching as the two elderly people collapsed and passed away on the dining room floor, Rachel had originally thought being with Mark would bring comfort and security. She never anticipated such a downfall. When her position deteriorated into mistreatment, she snapped. The two elders met a tragic end. After the incident, Rachel grabbed Tommy and fled toward the city, but law enforcement apprehended her swiftly. The trial was swift. She was sentenced to the maximum legal penalty for the crime, and Tommy was placed in a state orphanage. Each of them faced the consequences of their actions. With the past behind me, I saved enough money to rent a proper apartment in the big city. I took Jimmy with me, balancing my tailoring business with raising him in a vibrant environment. Soon, Jimmy started first grade, blossoming into a cheerful, active boy. He grew up confident and radiant, just as a child should be. As my savings grew, I eventually opened a small independent tailor shop on a busy street corner. Relying on my own craftsmanship, I built a stable life for us. We weren't wealthy, but we were genuinely happy. Years later, I received a letter from my mother with news from the facility. Mark had passed away after a violent altercation with another inmate. Hearing the news, a sense of finality washed over me, and I felt at peace. Years passed quickly, and Jimmy grew into a bright young man, successfully entering his dream university. On the autumn day he stepped onto campus, I stood a short distance away, watching him with tears of pride. His tall figure stood proud in the sunlight, replacing the tragic memories of the past. He was walking toward a bright future, and in this life I had reclaimed my own path, finding true independence and self-worth.
That's all for today. I'm Lina. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more amazing stories every week. Thanks for watching.